Politics comes with its highs and it comes with its lows. Today, my guest knows the highs and the lows.
No, Iain, don't go.
We'd like
Iain.
you to speak.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
So, Robin, I'm sick to death of the anti-American feelings that there are in this country at the moment.
He has a new book out, Have I Said Too Much? And that's the question I'm going to be asking him today. I'm joined by LBC's Iain Dale.
And I remember...
I'm Kaylem Shepherd, and this is The Memo. Iain Dale, thank you very much for joining me on The Memo.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
At the moment, it's a pleasure anyway.
It's a pleasure at the moment. Where do you think we're going to go?
Well, I've tried to think.
It'll be good, it'll be good. So I want to start with your childhood. You not as a broadcaster, not as a commentator, or even, the best kind of guy you are. You as a child, born in Essex, farming household.
Born in Cambridge, actually.
Cambridge?
But I was brought up in Essex.
Yeah.
I was born at the Evelyn Nursing Home, which doesn't exist any longer. And I don't know whether I held the record forever, but I was the longest baby ever to be born in the Evelyn Nursing Home.
Longest baby?
Yeah, that's one of my claims to fame, apparently.
You're incredibly tall now. But no, take me back. So you described your childhood as idyllic and perfect. Take me back to young Iain Dale. What was your childhood like? Why do you describe it as that?
Well, because it was. I got really annoyed when about 3 or 4 years ago, I did a podcast with a psychotherapist called Julia Samuel, who's psychotherapist to the royal family, believe it or not. And I quite admired her way of interviewing people. But she refused to believe me when I said my childhood was idyllic. She said, well, it can't have been. There must have been issues. I'm thinking, well, where's she trying to go with this? And I mean, I genuinely cannot think of anything bad about my childhood. I was brought up on a small farm in a little village in northwest Essex called Ashton, and I had 2 sisters. My parents were together. They never showed any sign of splitting up. Yeah. My mother was a stay-at-home mum because she was effectively a farmer as well. So I went to a small village primary school, Church of England. And everything, I mean, we weren't particularly well off. I mean, everyone thinks if you come from a farming background that you're incredibly rich. Yeah. Well, we weren't. The farm was 220 acres. It was mainly arable. We did have animals until we joined the common market in 1973, and they all had to be sold because it was uneconomic. Because it was a racket to protect French farmers, not British farmers. Get a quick political point in there.
Already?
Yeah, quite. And all my friends from school used to come up in the summer holidays for the harvest. We'd all go and help with the harvest. I mean, health and safety was not a thing in those days. Yeah. And like my mum would be carting the corn back to the farm, and there would be about 10 of us on the top of the corn trailer on the road, and no one thought anything of it. Mm. No one got injured in that time at all. And I really feel sorry for kids nowadays who don't have the same kind of upbringing that we did, where we would literally, in our, I don't know, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, we would go out of the kitchen door at 9 o'clock in the morning and come back at 5. Yeah. And my parents would be worried at all about what we'd got up to. It really was a sort of bit of a Swallows and Amazons type of upbringing, I suppose.
So why do you think Julia went into you when... Oh, that's quite a phrase already, isn't it? When you described your childhood as perfect and idyllic, because most people start their autobiography, saying it's not, and the trauma that they went through as a child.
I think if you're a psychotherapist, you generally deal with people who've had some sort of trauma in their lives. And I'm not saying that I haven't had the odd trauma in my life, but it didn't happen when I was a child. So I got a bit narky about that because she wouldn't let it go. And I mean, I suppose it depends when you think your childhood ends. I mean, I had a few teenage issues like most teenagers do.
What were your issues?
Got caught shoplifting in Boots in Cambridge when I was 13. And I mean, if I'm honest, and I do relate this in the book, I was a serial shoplifter. Yeah. And to this day, I don't know why I did it. Was it being, I mean, I've always been quite materialistic, I suppose. Was it because I didn't have a lot of pocket money to spend on things I wanted to buy? I just don't know. And it was quite a humiliating time because I remember when the police came to get me, and I was marched through Boots in handcuffs, and my sisters saw me. And then I had to go and do all the police interviews, and I was put in a cell. I had to take the shoelaces out of my shoe and all that. And in a way, I'm glad it happened, because it meant I never did it again. And it did go to court, at Cambridge Magistrates Court. And the day after that, or was it before? I can't remember. We were in a general studies class, and I saw my dad walking through the school car park in his Farmer's Wellington boots, going to see the headmaster, obviously to dob me in. And then 20 minutes later, I get called out of the class to go and see the headmaster. And that whole experience, I mean, it was good that they did it that way, because it taught me a lesson, and I never, ever did it again. Nowadays, I'm sure there'd be all sorts of like, oh, are you okay? Sort of, are you damaged, and all the rest of it. No, they played hardball, and they were right to.
And that's why you are how you are today. Hardball.
Yeah.
So you describe in the book as knowing you were gay from the age of about 7 or 8.
Well, I knew I was different. I wouldn't say I knew I was
you said
gay.
different. Yeah, you said different in the book. You weren't as, sporty as the other boys, but...
I'm not sure that I wasn't sporty. I just knew that I never played up to all the sort of macho larkery that goes on, even in primary school. I was always a much more sensitive or empathetic child, I suppose. And it was... I remember, I don't know how old I was, but it must have been 8, 9, 10, I guess. And there was a massive snowstorm, and a friend of mine had come over for the day and then couldn't get home because the cars couldn't get to the farm. So he stayed the night, and we basically slept top and tail in the bed. There was nothing sexual, but I kind of thought it was a bit... I instinctively thought it was a bit naughty, and quite liked somebody being alongside me. So that's kind of my first memory, if you like, of anything like that. But as I say, nothing happened when it wouldn't at that age. And then, but I kind of, as I got into my teens, I kind of knew, and I did make an approach once to one of my friends, which was firmly rebuffed.
You didn't want to come back.
No. And I just sort of, I put it in a box and put it away, and I never acted on it. And I mean, when I was at university, that was the time that I should have done something about it, but I didn't. There was no sort of, I mean, I think a lot of these things just happened by chance, but they didn't at university. And it was only when I was 28 that eventually I did do something with another guy. And it wasn't that I didn't like girls.
Because you had multiple girlfriends, I must
Well,
admit.
I did.
I thought you were bisexual in the book.
Well, I think everybody's bisexual to a degree. Oh God, he's going to kill me if I say this. But my partner, my husband, John, he reckons he's 100% gay, but he did try it out with a woman just to make sure.
Yeah.
Now, I always stopped it before it got to that point. I didn't want to have penetrative sex with a woman. And it led to 1 or 2 quite embarrassing episodes. But I did have feelings for them. And I can, even now, I can appreciate a woman's breasts.
Yes.
But I don't want to do anything about it.
Yes.
So I would say, if you have a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is completely straight and 100 is completely gay, John is 100 and I'm probably 95.
Yes. But you didn't come out until you were 40.
Well, it depends how you term come out.
To your mother?
To my mother, no, I was 40.
So if I could just go back to your childhood, do you think holding that from the women whom you love so much was hard for you?
Well, it was hard.
Because
a lot of people said to me that, well, of course your parents know. And I'm thinking, no, they don't. I knew my parents. And I had taken girlfriends back home, so they had no reason to suspect anything.
But was that to impress them?
impress my parents. No, it was just a natural thing to do. You're in a relationship with somebody. At some point, you introduce them to your parents. And I always say that if I had been born 10 years before I was, I'm pretty sure I would have ended up getting married to a woman. Even now, a lot of essentially gay men do get married to women to hide it. And I know that because I've done phone-ins on it on the radio. And then they'll dabble on the side, which is a terrible thing. And if you're a woman, I mean, it happens both ways. Lesbian women get married to men to hide it. And I think in some ways I count myself very lucky to have been born when I was. But your generation are the luckiest generation because you've never had the kind of pressures that my generation had. But if I'd been born in like 1922, you had no choice but to hide it. And you might have the odd sort of dabble in a public toilet or something because that was the only place where like-minded men ever met, and people are still horrified by that. But it was the same, really, I would say, until comparatively recently.
I think you described your mum as having a blank stare in her eye. That must have been a moment for you.
Well, I only came out to them, and like people in London, most people who I worked with knew, but a lot of my best friends didn't know because I hadn't told them. Some of them, I think, told me they suspected. Yeah. And it was only when I decided I really wanted to be an MP but I thought, well, I'm going to do it on my terms. I'm not going to hide it because I don't want to be open to any form of blackmail. And by that time, there were a few openly gay Conservative MPs, Alan Duncan being one. But nobody had done it having told the selection committee. And the first seat I applied for was Chipping Barnet in North London. And I told the selection committee. I didn't actually intend to. But at the end of it, the chairwoman said, is there anything embarrassing about your private or business life that might cause embarrassment to the association? And I just sort of blurted out, well, it's not embarrassing to me, and I hope it isn't embarrassing to you, but you should know that I'm gay. And I said, it's probably worse for you that I'm a supporter of West Ham, which got quite a big laugh. But the agent, I thought they took it quite well. The agent ran out after me at the end of the meeting and said, what on earth did you do that for? Yeah. I said, well, they asked a question, so I answered it honestly. He said, well, you just lost votes there. The next round, I was doing really well. I made a good speech, answered the questions well, but I missed out on getting to the final by 2 votes. And Teresa Villiers then won it. But the final was between 3 women. And in those days, if it was a man against 2 women, the man always won. Yeah. So, it's one of those what ifs. And of course, Teresa Villiers went on to be in the cabinet. So anyway, the night after the second round, I decided that was it. So I drove up the M11 to the family home, told my younger sister, who was upset because I told my older sister about 6 years previously, because she had been through an emotional time, and so it just sort of naturally came out. And then I told my parents, and my mother didn't quite compute what I was trying to tell her initially. And because John had been to the farm many, many times and got on really well with both my parents.
Your husband.
Yeah, but they didn't know. And she kept saying, well, I know he's your friend. I said, no, he's more than my friend. Yeah. And when the penny eventually dropped, you're right, there was this sort of empty look in her eyes. And my father always was brilliant in a family crisis, or indeed any kind of crisis. And I remember him saying, well, everyone has to live their own lives, and the main thing is that you're happy. But my mother didn't really say anything. And I remember getting into the car to go home, and my sister, I just sort of said something inane like, well, I suppose that went okay. And my sister said, you don't know the half of it. She said, and I'll have to pick up the pieces.
Is it me, or did she say, I wish you never told Mum?
My other sister didn't want me to do it that day. And I said, well, look, what would you do? Rather, she read it in the newspaper, which is what would have happened, because the first person to ever do something is newsworthy, whether you want to be or not. And of course, when I was eventually selected for a seat, it did get newspaper coverage. And And I just thought it was the honest thing to do. I'm not going to say it affected our relationship massively she died in 2012, so 10 years after this. She came to my civil partnership, but I could tell she'd rather have been anywhere else. But her relationship with John never changed. She confided in him things that she never told me or my sisters. So, but there's still a part of me that, and I don't think I've ever said this to anyone before, but there's still a part of me that would have rather not told them. And I don't know how much it affected her over the years. As I say, we still had a really good relationship. But there is part of me, although I'd kind of rather not have told her at all, I kind of wish I had told her many years before. And I remember driving to Norwich one day, I can't remember when it was, but it was probably the early 1990s, not that long after I had my first gay experience. And we were having a conversation about something, and that I remember thinking, shall I tell her now? Yeah. And I wimped out of it. Now, would she have been more understanding? Would it have gone down better then? I mean, I'll never know. But there is a little bit of a regret there.
And I can hear the upset in your voice when you're.
Well, nobody ever wants to gratuitously upset their parents, particularly when you've had.
But it's something that you can't control.
Well, you can control it by not telling them, I suppose. But because I was in the public eye, and I think my mother's main concern was that she knew I wanted to go into politics, and she was always concerned that it would be a very public existence. And I mean, I remember when the expenses scandal happened in 2009, and I, just after the 2010 election, I phoned her up telling her that I was going to come off the Conservative candidates list and I wouldn't stand for Parliament again, and she cheered. Yeah. Now, she should have been really upset by that, and she should have been thinking, but that's really what you've always wanted to do. But she just said, well, you could have got caught up in this kind of scandal. Yeah. I'm not sure whether she thought about any other kind of scandal. I was quite shocked by that reaction in many ways, but I wonder whether it was because she thought that, well, if you were a gay MP, and there weren't that many of them still in 2010, I mean, now it's almost a prerequisite to be, well, no, it's not, but I mean, there's actually, well, there's actually, if you look at it per, I mean, whether you think it's 5% of the population or 10%, gay people are overrepresented in Parliament now. So it's not the issue that it once was. And I like to think that I played a small part in that, because I remember after I was selected in 2003, I was at the Tory party conference, and this, I don't know, 22-year-old or something came up to me. He said, I just want to thank you. And I genuinely couldn't understand what he was thanking me for. I didn't know him. And he said, because you've made it easier for the rest of us. Yeah. And I'll always be proud of that, because I was the first to tell a selection committee, and I won with 66% of the vote in a very small C Conservative seat. So I thought, good on them that they had the courage to do it. And I'd just like to think that nowadays it may still be an issue for some people. And also, when you are from a minority, whether it's gay, whether you're from an ethnic minority or whatever, you have to work that bit harder to convince people that they haven't made a big mistake. And I suspect, I mean, when there were several black candidates selected in Essex, which came as a shock to everyone, that I mean, Priti Patel in Whittam, James Cleverly in Braintree, who was the other one? And anyway, I suspect they had to work a bit harder as well. And I remember in my first week as a candidate, getting a letter to the local Tory office from an association member who was resigning because it was disgusting that they'd selected a sodomite. And this was pretty horrible stuff in the rest of the letter. I can't remember all the details now. Anyway, a few months later, I was at one of the constituency social events, and this guy came up to me and really firmly gripped my arm. And I thought, hang on a minute, mate. Yeah. And he said, Mr. Dale, I've got to tell you something. He said, I wrote you a letter when you were selected, and I want to apologise for it. And as he talked, it gradually came back to me. I thought, oh my God, this is him. Yeah. And he said, I want to say you are a brilliant candidate, and I'm ashamed of what I wrote in that letter. And I thought, well, that must have taken some balls to say that to somebody who he had essentially regarded as the devil incarnate. So I like to think I won a few people round, even though I lost the election.
And there were only two things that you really wanted to do when you were a child, and that was to be a radio presenter and to be an MP.
Yes, I mean, I was destined to be a farmer because that's.
I had no interest though.
No, that's what the oldest son of a farming family always did, and like all my cousins were in farming families. Both of my parents came from farming families for generations back, but I knew from a very early age that that was not for me. I wanted to be a German teacher. I went to study German at UEA, and I mean, my parents must have been very disappointed, and we never really talked about it because when I was picking my GCSE subjects, or O-levels as they were then, I was still destined to go to agricultural college, and this was, the age of 14. So I chose biology and physics because I had to do science subjects. I was terrible at science subjects. And of course, by the time I'd done all my O-levels, I knew that I wanted to be a German teacher, but I hadn't taken French O-level, which was stupid. So I then had to do that very quickly. Well, I started doing the A-level, but dropped out of that because I found the literature too difficult. But I never had a conversation with my parents about it. It's only about, when I was reading out bits that one of my sisters mentioned in the book, just to check I hadn't upset them, my sister said to me, no, Mum always knew that you weren't going to be a farmer, and she was incredibly proud of you, which it meant a lot to hear that. I wish I hadn't had to wait so long to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you had an idyllic childhood.
Well, I did.
Yeah.
I mean, my mother, my dad was never particularly interested in schooling, but my mother wanted me to have a good education. She had had a good education, and she should have gone to university, but of course women just didn't in those days. She was born in 1931. And I often wondered if she had gone to university, what different path her life would have taken. She never complained. She enjoyed her life. She loved being a mother. We were the centre of her world. She never wanted to go out to work in the traditional sense. But she wanted me to have a private education. So at the age of 11, they entered me for entrance exams into various schools in Cambridge, which was like 16 miles away. And I passed them all. And I kept saying, but why can't I go to Saffron Walden County High like all my friends? Yeah. Well, you'll do better if you... And then she tried to convince me at some point, I don't know whether this was then or later, to hyphenate my surname to Iain Campbell Dale, which has a certain ring about it for an MP. But I always hated my middle name, so I said no. So I refused to go to a private school. I then flunked the 11 plus, because in those days in Essex there were lots of grammar schools. And Margaret Thatcher was actually Education Secretary at the time, and we were doing all these tests to sort of just test how like today's 10-year-olds were doing. And I remember being the ringleader one day in the class and saying, should we just not do this test properly? It was yet another one, not realising it was the 11 plus. Yeah. Had I passed that, I would have gone to Newport Grammar School, which is a good school, but I didn't. So I ended up going to the County High School in Saffron Walden, which many people would say was just as good as a grammar school, but it had been a secondary modern. And I did have a good education. I didn't do brilliantly in my exams. I only got 6 O-levels, failed physics and biology, ungraded in physics. And I was at primary school, I was always near either top or second in the class. And like the end of, you'll be horrified at this, but at the end of the year, they used to rank the class from 1 to 30.
God. Wouldn't do that now.
No, and I always came second to Eve Marshall. Yeah. The fact that I remember her name tells you how devastating it was to me. And every single year it was the same. I think because I had very shoddy handwriting and still do. But at secondary school, I was in the top stream. There were 3 classes in the top stream, but I was never a grade A student. In fact, I never got an A in any exam I ever took.
You mentioned Margaret Thatcher there. It was your grandmother that noticed your love of politics?
Well, I don't know whether she noticed. She certainly encouraged it. The day Margaret Thatcher was elected leader of the Conservative Party in 1975, I remember running up the stairs to tell her. She lived with us, and she was probably the biggest influence on me as a child. And she burst into tears when I told her. Yeah. And I remember thinking, that's a bit weird. Yeah. And then I asked her later, well, why did you get so emotional over that? And she said, because I never thought that a woman could ever lead a political party. And she lived to see Margaret Thatcher become Prime Minister, but died 6 months later. And she was she was born in 1894. And she was one of 12 children, which was not unusual in those days, even though the parents weren't Catholics. And she was the first to leave the family home in the village near where I grew up. And she went to London, and she worked for the post office, lived in Brixton High Street, then went to work at Wembley Stadium, which opened in 1923. But this is one of my very few real regrets in life. I never talked to my grandmother or really either of my parents about their childhoods and their teenage years, because my dad grew up on a farm very close to where I grew up. And it was he was 10 when the Second World War started, and there was an American air base just over the hedge. So he had the whale of a time during the war years, all sorts of adventures. But I wish I'd sat him down and videoed him talking about it all, because he just had so many wonderful stories. And my grandmother would have done as well, but I never asked her.
Yeah. We're very lucky now to be able to have phones to do all of
But
this.
I've got no recording of my mother's voice anywhere, which you think, well, that's ridiculous, because she died 2 years after I joined LBC.
It must be something.
Why didn't, well, I don't have anything. I wonder if my sisters do, but no, that's
Do you
a
still
big
remember
regret.
your mum's voice?
Yes, it's really weird that after she died, then my dad died 4 years later in 2016, I never dreamed about them. I do occasionally now, but only very occasionally. And I don't know whether that's normal, but I kind of wish I did a bit more than I do. I do think about them a lot, because we were very close. My mum was, how old was she when she died? 81, and my dad was 85, or was it 84? So, I mean, they lived longer than most people do. But next weekend, I'm going to visit my Auntie Esther in North Devon, who's married to my dad's brother John, and she's 90 this month. And you often think about all the things that you've missed out on, but my dad I think he was slowly getting mild dementia just before he died. So, and he wouldn't have wanted to live like that. So I can't have too many regrets, but they were always so supportive to me. Whatever I did, I knew I had their backing, even though I knew that there was what I thought was a bit of disappointment.
You've lived an extraordinary life, and it's detailed in your book. What was the inspiration behind the book? I mean, your career isn't over.
No, and that's partly why I've never done it before, because when you write an autobiography, you only have one chance at this. But I wanted to write it while I was still in the public eye. I mean, I've got no idea how long I'll be doing what I do for. I still love doing the radio show, so as long as LBC want me, I shall probably stay. But I thought, well, no, let's do it now, because, the idea was put into my head by a couple of friends who said, well, you should write your life story. And I said, well, it's not that interesting. They said, well, you've done loads of things that are really interesting, and you've met so many interesting people. You've got anecdotes coming out of your ears.
Miranda Hart.
Yes. So they said, why don't you just write a couple of chapters, and if you enjoy it, continue. So that's what I did. And it ended up being far longer than it should have been. I've cut it down a bit. I probably should have cut it down a bit more. But as I say, you only have one go at this. And my agent said to me, you should only write 110,000 words. And I wrote 177,000. And I've cut it down to about 158. But I thought, I'm not going to fill it the book, so a lot of important things are taken out, because, I mean, this is effectively, I mean, it's there for someone in 50 years' time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure who will have heard of me in 50 years' time, I don't know. But I wanted it to be a proper account of my life, warts and all. Now, obviously, when you write an autobiography, you can't include everything.
What haven't you included?
Well, I didn't want to write a book that would upset people. And I mean, there are obviously things, you can't go through life without having rows with people or falling out with people. And I have talked about one or two of these friends or people that I have fallen out with. But you don't, I mean, Anne Widdecombe always used to tell me that she would never write her autobiography because she didn't want to have a friendless old age.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, after Strictly, she did write her autobiography called Strictly Anne. And my initial title for this book was A Dish Served Cold, which I think is a brilliant book title. But various people said, you can't use that.
A bit too cold.
Well, they said, is it that kind of book where you're basically having a go at everyone?
Yeah.
I said, well, no, there's probably about 3 people that I have a go at throughout the book. But I have tried to be as honest as I can, partly to make sure that it's entertaining, partly to keep people reading. So I haven't sort of filleted it too much, I don't think.
Mm. And you've had, incredible chapters like your publishing, your books, the autobiography. You've done a lot.
Well, I've done a lot of different things, but they've all been involved in the politics and the
yeah.
media to one degree or another. I mean, I think the chapter on sort of relationships and whatever, that's going to be the one that people will take note of, because I probably have gone into a little bit too much detail on some aspects of that.
Like your wet dreams.
I
thought that was a good...
You have read the book.
Yeah, I thought that was a good... I thought your mother was perfect then, the way she came into your room.
Well, now I have to explain
and sat
this.
down and just...
Well, I mean, I don't know how old I was, 12, 13 or something like that. And I kept wetting the bed, or at least I thought I'd wet the bed. And there was I remember one, and normally I would just get this blanket and sort of like pretend it hadn't happened. And then one night, shall we say, there was more than usual. And I remember going into my mum's room and saying, can you change my sheets? Yeah. So she came and took the sheets off, and she said, has your father not talked to you about this? Yeah. I said, talk to me about what? And then she sort of rolled her eyes and just sat me down and then told me what a wet dream was. And I was mortified. Yeah. And my father never did ever have any conversations along those lines. But then again, I think I'm right in saying that my sister said that she never had the conversation with them about periods. Okay. And I don't think that was unusual in those days. So, yeah, that was a bit mortifying.
I mean, sex education at your school was kind of looked down
it was just awful.
Yes.
I mean, we had one of the teachers who was the head of geography, and then the other one was the head of needlework. I mean, can you imagine needlework being a subject at a high school? Anyway, it was. And Mrs. Matthias hated it. She did not want to be there. But Mr. Maidment revelled in it, and he would regale us of his tales of bonking Mrs. Maidment on a Saturday night and how they would make sure there were no more little Maidments. And we would all just sit there horrified. Yeah. And it was just awful. And I suspect sex education has come on a bit since those days, but it's nowhere near it should be. And I remember I've done lots of phone-ins on it.
I mean, the sex education we have now is Bonnie Blue. I mean,
well, you're sweet for yourself. But I mean, the homosexuality was never mentioned, and it was just weird. So, I mean, people should not have been surprised that there was quite a high teenage pregnancy rate in those days, because people would experiment. And okay, that's a natural thing for young people to do. But I didn't. Partly because there was sort of no real outlet to do it. I mean, I can remember finding with my friends where we were sort of going, there was some wreck of, it was an old Sunday school at the end of our drive which led up to the farm, and we were sort of playing in it one day. It was basically derelict, and we found this stash of pornographic magazines, sort of like Fiesta, Readers' Wives and all of that sort of thing. and we couldn't understand why there was a toilet roll, but with the obviously some bloke from the local estate
Goes down the corner.
go down the corner to have a wank.
Yeah. And they still do it now. Hey everybody, I'm Kaylem Shepherd. Thank you very much for watching the podcast. Please just take a second to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure it's available on your podcast app. That can be Spotify, it can be Apple. The Memo with me, Kaylem Shepherd, wherever you get your podcast. Once again, thank you for watching. So take me into the world of politics. You went to university, studied linguistics and German. How did you end up having a bookstore in London?
Oh my God. Well, UEA in those days, and this was the early 80s, beginning of the Thatcher years, very left-wing university. There was no conservative society there. There was Labour, Liberal Democrat, well, Liberal as it then was. Then the SDP came along, and there's all these weird and wonderful left-wing trot groups. And the Falklands War happened in the spring of my first year. And I was politically engaged, so I went along to a debate on the merits or demerits of the Falklands War. Should we send a task force to retake the Falklands? In my innocence, I assumed it would be somebody from putting the government's point of view, and then somebody saying, no, we should not be doing this. Instead, it was the hard left versus the soft left. Yeah. And I sat there, and you will have seen me do this from time to time, getting progressively angrier and angrier, to the extent that at the end of the thing, when they had Q&A, I stood up and made a little speech of my own, and I quite enjoyed it. Yeah. So I got together with the guy that lived in the room next door to me in our university residences. We decided to put up a Conservative stand at the Freshers' Fair the following October. And we got 250 members, each paying a £5, which a £5 in 1981 was probably about 20 quid now. Yeah. And off we went. I got an invitation to a reception at Downing Street for all the different chairmen and they were mostly all men, of university conservative associations, which the Prime Minister hosted. So that was the first time I'd ever really been to anything in Westminster. And so I met Margaret Thatcher, and half of the cabinet were there. And we had guest speakers come to the university. Remember Cecil Parkinson, who was then, he just resigned from the cabinet he had an affair with his secretary that resulted in her having a baby, so he resigned from the cabinet. 900 people in one of the lecture theatres, and the sort of trot started throwing eggs, all of which hit me and Anne Parkinson, his wife. And it was quite something. I had UEA Rugby Club as security, and they tried to invade the stage. Well, they didn't get very far, let's put it that way. And then after university, I got a job in the House of Commons as a researcher. Well, actually, to be honest, I was a glorified secretary. I was doing all the correspondence and thoroughly enjoyed it. And there was a lot of imposter syndrome, and I've always suffered from that really throughout my life until fairly recently, where I've never thought I was quite good enough. And I mean, when you, on your first day, you walk through the House of Commons and you see ex-Prime Minister James Callaghan walking down the corridor with ex-President Gerald Ford, and you think, what's a boy from Essex doing in a place like this? So I did that for 2 years. Then I got a job as a political lobbyist for the ports industry. Then I had 3 months working for a political consultancy, which I hated, so I left. And then went back to my old boss in the ports industry to start a transport consultancy, which I did for 5 years. And then we had a big falling out.
That was a hard time for you, right?
That was a very hard time because I'd spent 6 years of my life building up this company. We'd started also a conference company, which I was responsible for. It was all going very well. And then he brought his wife in to work there as the office manager. And I'd always gotten really well with her. But she, oh my God, she just caused havoc. Every member, I mean, it was about 20, 25 of us, at least half of them reporting to me. And she tried to get rid of all the people reporting to me because she thought they were all useless. Well, they weren't. So I defended them. And then it got to the stage where I had to sit Nick, the guy that I'd been working with for literally nearly 10 years, sit him down and say, your wife is going to be the cause of the ruination of this company. And he essentially said to me, well, if you think you're going to win a battle with her, you're wrong. So from that moment, this was February 1996, from that moment I knew that my days were numbered there. So I had to put my ducks in a row for when I knew I would have to leave. So I started working on a business plan for a political bookshop. I'd seen something similar in Washington and thought, well, if it can work in Washington, it can work here. Anyway, I then went on holiday to Washington for a couple of weeks, wrote my letter of resignation, but he beat me to it. Waiting for me in my pigeonhole in my flat on the way when I got home was a letter sacking me for gross misconduct, because I had warned my star employee that they were going to get rid of her. Yeah. And she rather cut the rug from under my feet by deleting everything off her computer, like all the conference organising stuff. So that was the end of that. And then, so Politico's eventually opened in February 1997, just before the 97 general election. And so I ran that for 7 years until the congestion charge came in, which reduced footfall. Yeah. Amazon just started. The landlord wanted to put the rent up by 50%. And given the landlord was the Crown Prosecution Service, I thought it's best not to. And I thought, well, I could probably survive for another 2 years, but I can't sign a 10-year lease. So I took it all online, and it was one of those head versus heart decisions. I didn't want to do it, but I knew I had to, and it was exactly the right decision.
Iain, it was the place. I mean, granted, I wasn't born then, but it was the place to go for political gossip. Everybody was there, journalists, MPs.
It was part of the fabric of the Westminster Village. Yeah. And we would hold events there, probably 2 or 3 nights a week, either book launches or, I mean, Claire Fox used to run a magazine called Living Marxism, and they would do like speaker debates there. And it really, people loved it. I mean, even if they came and didn't buy anything, it was still part of the Westminster life. And I mean, there were some MPs that when I did close it, they thought I was only closing it because I wanted to be an MP. Yeah. Wasn't the reason at all. And although, I mean, it didn't fail, it didn't go bust. I eventually closed I sold the online business to another company. And when I closed the company down, everyone who had put money into it, and they were mainly friends and family, they all got it back. Yeah. So I didn't sort of close it down with loads of debts. And if I had loads of debts, I would have made sure that over time the people got the money back, even though there was no legal. But I mean, everyone said to me, well, we didn't put money into this to make money. Yeah. We did it because we believed in you, and you've done a brilliant job. So don't feel guilty. That was sort of an end of an era. And that was really when I started to get into the media, because we'd have lots of journalists come in.
Is that when you started your blog as well?
Yeah, the blog started in 2003, so sort of at the fag end of Politico's,
And there, you went into broadcasting after that. I mean, let's actually focus on the blog for a bit. You had one of the biggest blogs in the UK.
Well, you always have an advantage if you're a first mover. Yeah. And although blogs had existed for a couple of years, I'd never heard of one. I didn't read blogs. It was only when I went to Washington that an English guy that I knew there showed me his blog. And then within 10 minutes, he'd made one for me. Yeah. And I instantly got how powerful this could be, because I had a website, but I had to have somebody, if I wanted to put something new on the website, someone else had to do it for me. I didn't know about coding or anything. But this, you could just instantly update. So I would write 2 or 3 things a day, and then on the first day, it got 1,000 people looking at what I'd done. I thought, wow, this is incredible. But it was only really, I had to stop doing it after I lost the election in 2005, and then I went to work for David Davis on his leadership campaign. And that, I didn't think it was appropriate to do a blog during that, because inevitably I'd say something injudicious. Yes. So I closed it down for 6 months. And when I started it again at the end of 2005, it really took off. And it was Guido Fawkes, Tim Montgomery on Conservative Home, and myself. We were the 3 leading political blogs. I was getting more traffic than The Independent had readers, a national newspaper, and it was just me. Yeah. But there was a lot of pressure, because I was writing at that point probably I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 articles a day. And a lot of them were very short. And some of them would be sort of quite personal. And it was a real mixture. But it built me an audience, a lot of whom have stayed with me to this day and now listen to my radio show. And I did enjoy it. I mean, a few hairy moments. But it gave me a public profile, which I hadn't had before.
And you met incredible people, Giles Brandreth,
Well,
Joe.
Giles Brandreth, I owe him an awful lot because, I mean, there are 3 people without whom I wouldn't have had a radio career. I always wanted to be on the radio, and I used to do a lot of punditry, particularly surrounding the blog, but I wanted to be a presenter, and I knew I could do it. I don't know if, there are times when you just know that if you get the opportunity, you'll be good at something. And that was something I just kind of knew that I could do if only I could get an opportunity. And without Giles, without Tommy Boyd, without Joe Phillips, those are the 3 people, I think that I probably, if they hadn't existed or hadn't given me an opportunity, I doubt whether I would have got the job at LBC. Giles used to do a Sunday afternoon arts and culture show. And he had this feature called Stairway to Heaven, which was a bit like Desert Island Discs, where you sort of talked about all the things you'd miss if you died the next day. Yeah. And one day I said to him, well, why don't you be a guest on it and I'll present it? Yeah. And that's what happened. That was the first radio show I ever did, bizarrely, on LBC. Yeah. And then Joe Phillips, who was a customer at Politico's, who I'd got to know at book launches, she said one day, would you like to come and co-present Sunday Service on 5 Live, which was a Sunday morning political, humorous show, bit of sport as well, perfect for me. And it was with feed lover Charlie Whelan and Andrew Pearce. And Andrew Pearce was going on holiday. So she said, would you like to come and do it? And we'll pay you 600 quid. And I thought all my Christmases had come at once because it was my favourite radio show. Yeah. And so that was a big break. And I did about, 20, 25 of those shows, which I've actually got all of them because somebody at the BBC emailed me and said, look, I've just been going through the BBC archive. Yeah. I've found all of these shows. Would you like me to send them to you as MP3s? And I've listened to some of them back and I thought I did quite well. And I just sort of thought, well, somebody's going to notice me, even if it isn't 5 Live. And there was one day when the presenter, Fee had finished by that time, and Juliette Morris was the presenter, and her alarm hadn't gone off. So she didn't turn up to do the show. And I remember saying to Joe, let me do it. I can do this. She talked to Steve Kite, who was the deputy controller of 5 Live, and he said, no, Sheila Fogarty was presenting the breakfast show, so she can just stay on. I was gutted. Yeah. And I often think what might have been. I've talked to Roger Mosey, who was the controller of 5 Live then, and I said, why didn't you... Because he said, I knew you were really good at it. I said, well, why didn't you offer me the opportunity? He said, I don't know, and I really regret it now. And I've got all of these people. Jonathan Wall was another one who was controller of 5 Live. And he has told me since that I was the one that he should have approached but didn't. And so nothing happened. I did a bit of punditry on LBC around the time of the Iraq War. And again, I thought, well, why aren't they letting me do a programme? But what I didn't realise, that I should have knocked on their door.
Knock on the door.
I should have said, give me a chance. Yeah. But again, my sort of innate, and people always think this is ridiculous when I say my innate shyness, but I am quite a shy person, actually. And I now know that that's what you have to do. So when... in 2009, Tommy Boyd, who had been quite a big name in speech radio, and he used to present a kids' TV programme called Magpie, which I remembered from the 70s. He rang me up one day and he said, I'm setting up an internet radio station which will have all sorts of different channels, mainly music, but we want to do a station called Play Talk. And he said, everyone I talk to, your name, I come back to your name. Yeah. How do you fancy it? I thought, brilliant. Yeah. So for about 6 weeks on a Friday night, I'd go and present a 2-hour radio show from a barn near Arundel. Yeah. So it's about like 60 miles there, 60 miles back, wasn't paid, and had an absolute ball. And I remember one night was European election night, and I had like Boris Johnson and Nick Clegg on. Yeah. And I mean, first of all, I thought no one will listen to this, but I thought it'd be a good experience. 10,000 people were tuning into the stream, and this was 2009 when people weren't used to listening to internet radio. anyway, the station went bust after 6 weeks, so that finished. And then LBC came along.
Well, talking about radio, we've got a special video from one of your close friends and someone who actually got you into the industry. Let's take a look.
God.
I have known Iain Dale probably for about 20 years, back in the day when he had Politico's bookshop and I was producing Sunday Service for 5 Live. And Politico's was the place to go, where the wine flowed, the gossip flowed even more freely. And Iain and I became friends, and then he hooked me onto West Ham. So we spent many, many happy and not so happy days at West Ham. And we've done loads of things together. I mean, he says I got him into broadcasting. I gave him a slot on Sunday Service to fill in for Andrew Pearce once. And I can only apologise to listeners on LBC and elsewhere, because I think that was what gave him the bug. The thing I find astonishing about Iain is I don't think he ever relaxes. He's a workaholic to the point of being obsessive, because even when you're doing something that's supposed to be relaxing, like going to football, you know he's thinking about whether he could compile a list of people who scored a goal from that particular position during the West Ham history. And before you know it, there'll be a book coming out. I mean, his work output is prolific. And he's become something of a national treasure because he's a very good broadcaster. He listens, and he's wedded to his ideas so much that he won't listen to another person's point of view. I don't think I've ever seen Iain get particularly cross, except for one time when we had a terrible taxi driver who nearly killed us on the way back to Kent. But that was after he and I had done the opening ceremony live broadcast from the 2012 Olympics, which was hilarious because we couldn't actually see anything. We couldn't see the stadium, but we managed to do it on a perch in a bar near the stadium and watch what was going on the television and busk it. And that's what Iain's good at. He's a great broadcaster because he knows how to busk it. But I'd love to see him sit back and relax one day.
There you go, Iain. A message from one of your close friends.
Well, that is Joe Phillips. I mean, this is a bit like This Is Your Life, isn't it? When you sort of like...
Piers Morgan life stories.
Yeah. I mean, Jo is a great woman. She lives in Whitstable now, which is not that far from where I'm in Tunbridge Wells. And she's kind of been on my conscience a bit because we don't see each other very often anymore because she doesn't come to West Ham anymore. She's discovered sailing.
Yes.
And so she spends all her time doing that. But as a result of that, I'm going to give her a call after this.
Oh. Well, Iain, we're running out of time and there's just so much to talk about. I just want to zoom in lastly on LBC and your resignation.
Yes.
Was it 22 hours?
No, it's a bit more than that. In 2024, I thought that the political bug had just got out of my system. And then Rishi Sunak called the 2024 general election, remember, in the rain. 3 days after that, I heard that Greg Clark, the local MP in Tunbridge Wells, a friend of mine, was standing down. So I just tweeted, well, really sorry to hear this. He's been a great MP. Good luck for the future. Thought nothing more of it. And then his assistant, Alex, who had done some work for me, he WhatsApped me and said, you do realise you're the talk of the Tunbridge Wells Conservative WhatsApp groups. And I said, why? Yeah. Genuinely, and he said, because they want you to be the candidate to succeed Greg. I thought, no way, because I'd been very critical of the Conservatives on Tunbridge Wells Council, and I mean over the years. But then the thought sort of started to percolate through my mind, and I thought, well, what if? So I started ringing a few people, saying, what do you think? And I do go into great detail on this in the book, so I won't give you all the gory details here. Eventually, I decided to do it. So the following Tuesday, I told my boss at LBC, Tom Cheel, and his boss, James Rea, and they were very supportive. And they said, if it all goes wrong, you've always got a job at Global. Thank God, in retrospect. and it did go wrong the next day. So I announced my resignation at the end of my show on the Tuesday. Didn't cry, which is, as you know, because you've read the book, is very unusual. And the next morning, I was still in bed. I get a call from Andrew Kennedy, who was going to be my campaign agent. He said, we've just had an email from the local Lib Dems with some comments you made on your podcast saying that you didn't like Tunbridge Wells and you'd rather live anywhere else. And I thought, oh, shit.
Yes. But some people think that you could have survived that.
Well, I knew different.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to suffer death by 1,000 cuts. And I almost instantly, well, by the end of that day, had decided that I couldn't survive it because it would have just appeared on every Lib Dem leaflet. So,
In a sense, are you happy that?
well, I was happy because the Lib Dems won the seat by 8,000. Now, even if Greg Clark had stood, I think he would have lost. I certainly would have lost. Possibly I might have, I mean, I do have quite a lot of listeners in Tunbridge Wells. Whether they'd all have voted for me, I don't know. But I just thought, no, just take your name out of the selection. So that's what I
John's
did.
quite happy.
Yeah, he had reconciled himself to the fact that, I mean, it was basically, as Jackie Smith put it, it's an itch you need to scratch.
Yeah. Has that itch been scratched?
No, well, I genuinely no longer have the itch.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went on the Nick Ferrari show on the Friday to explain myself. And I remember saying, I do feel a sense of utter humiliation, which I still do to an extent. Everyone says to me, well, you shouldn't. At least you put your head above the parapet more than most people do. And then on the Monday, I was back on LBC, so I only missed 3 programmes.
You've lived an extraordinary life, Iain. Going back now, is there anything that you wish you could have changed?
Well, there are lots of sliding door moments, aren't there, in anybody's life? And I don't believe in sort of having too many regrets. Yeah, I would have loved to have been an MP. I mean, and I think in some ways I would have been a really bad MP because I would have been a maverick. I used to describe myself as being, well, I would have been the male equivalent of Nadine Dorries.
I love her. Oh, gosh.
Rebelling against the whip and doing my own thing. So would I have ever been a minister? I don't know. But the thing is, Theodore Roosevelt once said, you have to be in the arena to change things. And I can influence things from the sidelines doing what I do in broadcasting. And a lot of my friends who are MPs think I have far more influence than they do. But you can't actually change anything. You can't change the law to benefit people. So that is a slight regret. But other than that, no, I don't believe in sort of wallowing in self-pity over the things that have gone wrong in my life. I think I have done a lot of good things. I've published 1 million books. I've written or edited 60 books. I've broadcast thousands of hours and podcast thousands of hours. I've made a lot of friends that I don't know I even have through my broadcasting. And the LBC job is the best job I've ever had, and it will never be surpassed. And I have the attention span of a flea. And normally everything I've done in my life, whether it's jobs or anything else, it lasts a few years and then I get bored and want to do something else. Well, I'm still there after 16 years. And if I ever get to the point where I feel I'm just going in and picking up the paycheck and I either don't enjoy it or I get a bit bored by it, that's the time that then I will want to draw the line. But I haven't got to that point yet, and I hope I don't for a long time to come.
I'm sorry we don't have more time, Iain, but thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Kaylem.
Appreciate it. Hey everybody, I'm Kaylem Shepherd. Thank you very much for watching the podcast. Please just take a second to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure it's available on your podcast app. That can be Spotify, it can be Apple. The Memo with me, Kaylem Shepherd, wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, thank you for watching.